Let me see if we're both fuzzy.
Good morning, good afternoon, CJ.
We're 4 minutes from officially starting. I just want to see if
it may be live right now.
We are live, but I just want to see if it fixed the fuzziness. Anyway, we got a few minutes to go. We'll go live in 3.5 minutes. Where are you right now?
I am in America. I'm in Atlanta, which is, as I wrote on LinkedIn a few days ago, it's got a lot of Africa connections. It's actually got a higher profile in Africa than probably most people in Atlanta realize, with between Delta's flights there, and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Carter Center, Coca-Cola, you name it. I'm just passing through, but eventually getting back to the mother continent later in the month is the plan.
Right on. And where are you going in the mother continent? You go back to Kenya?
Go back to Kenya. Now, CJ, my screen's showing us as live.
Yeah, we are live, but she says it's still fuzzy, but not terrible. So we're just going to go for it. We've got 2 minutes. I put it on live just to see if it would fix the screen. But officially, we are talking about Zimbabwe in about 1.5 minutes. So you've got a little time.
So if you are watching us at the moment, just get some coffee. We'll be with you in about 90 seconds. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you should sing a song or something.
Maybe get a cocktail, depending on where you are.
It is cocktail time. And that's not Irish coffee. I wish it was, though. I did a phone call today for a maize trade, and it was originated by a guy in Sydney. It was 11:30 his time. It was 30 here, 3 o'clock our time, because I got off to get on the phone with you. And there was a guy in Miami and a guy in New York, and they called some guy in Tanzania who didn't know how to work his camera on the phone.
The last time we did a live session 2 weeks ago, or a little over 2 weeks ago, CJ, I was in Hawaii, and I've determined that no business can be conducted with Africa from Hawaii. It's simply, literally the other side of the world. It's 12 or 13 hour time difference. Forget it. Just go to the beach.
I think you just dropped these little travel bombs on me to make me feel terrible about myself, because you were in DC for Labor Day, spent August in Hawaii, and I've been in Harare and Lusaka, pretty much, unless I've been in blustery, cold Cape Town.
Just the tropics without the breeze and the ocean.
That's true. That's true. All right, so we're about seconds from starting. I hope you have a sizzler to come out with the gate with.
I do. This is going to literally fly out of the gate, is the way I'm looking at it. So let me know when I can speak to the assembled masses.
Well, let me be your NBC Peacock countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, go for it.
CJ, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're coming to us from within the sound of our voice. This is Edward DeMarco at Edward in Africa, as some know me, with my sidekick, Christopher Janu, over there in the mother continent. And it's morning here in America.
It's always morning in America. Good to see you, Edward in Africa. I was looking forward to this little podcast, actually, because I just got back from Harare, and I've been spending a lot of time in Zimbabwe for the last couple of years, kind of probing, finding some entry points and whatnot. And so I went over with our COO, Kudzi Jo, who is actually from Zimbabwe, but based here in Lusaka, where I am presently. And oh my goodness, I was on a hotel panel for the Africa Property Investment Forum. And after the panel, just like pension funds and listed property companies came up with tons of projects, and really something is going on in Zimbabwe. So I'm pretty excited to talk about it.
That's what you told me, and there's always something happening in Zimbabwe, whether it's good or bad or getting better is always, I think, the question in a lot of people's minds. But I'm excited about this. We called it Pariah State or Next Big Thing, kind of giving you the extreme possibilities there.
Okay.
And yeah, but I wondered. You said you'd visited some watering hole there, which maybe already has decided on this issue.
Yeah. So the funny thing is the title of the vlog came up because there. I remember a couple of years ago I went there and the place is still there, and there was this wonderful hole in the wall bar, bar food and tequila shots and easy women. Well, not that part, but and it was called Pariah State. I'm like, in such a controlled environment, how would the government allow a place to open up in the middle of Bardale, like the one of the really kind of bougie nodes, and call themselves Pariah State? But somehow it just kind of went over the heads of everybody. But that's how I came up with that phrase, and I think it's apropos. And as we get into this little podcast, I'm going to give you like my quick little hot take. We as a company kind of look for economic opportunities in places where we have a competitive advantage or have some value to offer. We like to see lots of demand generators, a lot of headroom, and sort of an emerging trend. And I am hot on Zimbabwe, and I think it is going to really explode over the next 5 or 10 years in good ways, not the traditional African ways. And I think that's part of what we're going to be talking about during this podcast. But my intrepid compadre over in Atlanta, you are the geostrategist, the geopolitical scientist, the journalist. Give us some context about this wonderful country and why it's been so maligned in certain corners of the world.
At the end of the alphabet. And I should also introduce myself by explaining that I'm a development strategist in Africa. Most recently, I was running U.S. democracy and governance initiatives for the United States in Malawi, which is not too far away from Zimbabwe, one of the 3 priority countries in Africa for democracy renewal in the Biden administration. And previously, years back before I went to Africa, was an international politics editor for a global news organization. And in that context, did quite a bit of editing around Africa topics. But today I'm really, as you are, focused on the Africa story. We think it's a huge opportunity. And Zimbabwe has always been that kind of outlier country that's been kind of on the bad list for a long time. A very, very quick rewind. The country was one of the last to switch to black rule, to black African rule in 1980. That was after a protracted civil war between the white minority rulers of the country, then called Rhodesia, and the anti-government forces, including those of the eventual president, Robert Mugabe. And that went on from the mid-1960s to the end of the 1970s before that finally got resolved in favor of an election in which Mugabe emerged as the new leader of the country, of the independent country of Zimbabwe. But the promise of Zimbabwe, as you said, we've talked about it as it was the big agricultural, the breadbasket of the region, big trade hub of the region. That just by the turn of this century really started to fragment and to really go downhill. There was a policy to grab land of the white farmers that had stuck around in the country who were actually quite productive, and that became a kind of a symbol of all that was going wrong in Zimbabwe, and led and this is really shorthanding the story, but it did lead to sanctions under George W. Bush in 2003, I believe, or 2005, somewhere around there. That we began a sanctions program, a very broad one, against dozens and dozens of government and political party related figures. And just the idea that Zimbabwe was kind of cut off, began to be cut off and be regarded as that pariah you're talking about, began to really squeeze that economy, which became very dysfunctional and weird. Most famously, with the Zimbabwean dollar becoming kind of like the German currency in the post World War I Germany, just worthless. I think it was at one point 100 trillion Zimbabwean dollars are worth less than one U.S. dollar. So inflation was completely off the charts, and the country, in a sense, was on the outs, particularly with the United States. That's the very quick snapshot. Over to you for the news flash and what you're seeing.
Yeah, so that's a great context, because I think it sort of got baked in that Zimbabwe was kind of hard to do business, and there's been a huge brain drain, and the inflation, as well as the kind of the fluctuating, sort of they kept sort of coming up with new sort of ways to conduct economic transactions and whatnot. I think they've had like 3 currencies, and they finally defaulted to the dollar. And I have a really good friend who does retail centers in Zambia and also in Zimbabwe, and he said that one of the things that made him move back to Zimbabwe was that the government, the latest government, had decided that they were going to kind of stick to the dollar for 10 years, just to kind of give some surety and some sort of reliability to the market, so that people could make investments, and there wouldn't be like all this regulatory uncertainty. Well, my COO Kudzi had as we went over for this last trip, he kind of reminisced about an anecdote that kind of encapsulated the whole ridiculousness of the currency situation. He said that when he was in college, he used to go to the bar like 7:30, 8 o'clock with a buddy, and they would buy like a bucket of beers, and by 9:30 the beers would be worth 20, 30, or 40% more, and so then they would sell them to people having bought them. It was like this little arbitrage that would allow them to drink for free all night. But now with this, the regularization of using the dollar as kind of the default currency in Zimbabwe, there's been just this massive burst of activity, in terms of development and whatnot. Now, Zimbabwe, speaking as an investor and an entrepreneur and somebody who does a lot of real estate, private equity, and whatnot, we need sort of regulatory security and sort of reliability, because a lot of our projects are kind of long term, whether it's hotel developments or otherwise. And having kind of a 10-year window to kind of achieve investor yields is a good thing. But added to that, especially in the property sector, is that there still are currency controls. So it's always been a kind of a little bit of a mystery how you kind of take dollars out of the country. There are ways, we'll talk about that. But for the common, Zimbabwean, for the average Joe, it's hard to get money out of the country. And so in an inflationary environment, what do? They invest in real estate. And so as a result, you've got this gigantic boom going on in Harare and secondary towns and Vic Falls and whatnot. Pension funds and asset managers, they're the institutional investors in the country. They have to apportion about a third of their assets to real estate. They call them alternative investments. And so it's created this like really dynamic property market there. And what I saw this last time around, we as I said, I was speaking on this hotel panel, and there was a lot of excitement around commercial real estate, and there was a lot of developments going up around apartments and single family homes. The prices were just unbelievable. I just couldn't believe it. Like in a country that's basically poor, except for this distorted little elite portion that is doing quite well. I mean, houses were, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 for single family homes. They have a lot of multifamily and semi-detached, and that was really fascinating to watch. And really, compared, I would say, to Zambia, architecturally, really progressive, very interesting, big developers. So it was from my view, it represented just a huge opportunity, especially in real estate, but many other sectors as well.
Well, there's a few things going on, right? There's a new currency. There's a switch in kind of this U.S. dropped the old sanctions, put some new ones on. We'll talk about that in a second, and kind of some things to be aware of. And the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, was just out there doing a pretty close look at the economy, meeting with government officials, and concluded that 2025 is, just basically reflecting what you're saying. 2025 is going to be a rebound year for Zimbabwe. One thing that's hit them hard this year is the El Nino driven drought that's also affected Zambia even worse, and Malawi as well. And it has really undercut agricultural output in a country that depends on that. So IMF says 2025 is going to be a year where the economy is going to show its resilience. And just what you're saying, there are these kind of positive signs. Now I'm going to talk about some of the things that aren't so glowing in a few minutes. But what concretely did you see, like on the ground, that told you, there's some real chance for this place to kind of move ahead?
So, there's definitely a lot of dollars floating around, a lot of dollars, and very expensive restaurants, and there's also kind of a wealth there, and it's kind of conspicuous, and people like to show off. So you see a lot of big fancy houses and big fancy cars and whatnot. But moreover, some of the telltale signs of an economy that's on the rise are satellite dishes, for instance. The activity in the retail centers, the property sector, and in particular the residential sector, of course. The other thing that I noticed was that there's this giant student class there, and Zim has always been known throughout Southern Africa as having a really superior educational system. I think it's kind of had some nicks and bruises over the last couple of decades, but even now, I mean, Zimbabweans are known as some of the best educated Africans on the continent, and very capable and very aspirational.
Yeah, that's been my experience with encountering people working in different international organizations or in different kinds of contexts. Folks from Zimbabwe are really, really sharp and really, really very worldly in their outlook, which contrasts with this kind of basket case, as you put it, of a country. At least that's been the way it's been perceived over the last roughly 20 years. Can I spin the globe for just a second, CJ, and just kind of mention that the president of Zimbabwe, Emerson Mnangagwa, is at this moment in China, and that's because China has gathered most of the leaders of Africa there for its summit, which they've not done in person since before COVID. So I think 2018 was the last time. And he got pretty glowing reception from President Xi, and also state media in China talking about China wants to deepen its relationship with Zimbabwe across a whole range of things, infrastructure as well as cultural things, educational exchanges, and the whole bit. And that reflects some of that reflects how China supported the guerrilla fighters way back in the day. As well as Russia. We'll talk about that down the way here. But 2 months or 3 months ago, Mnangagwa was in St. Petersburg, Russia, where he was praising his buddy Vladimir Putin. And he's been kind of the outlier country on that, not criticizing Russia for the invasion of Ukraine, not being very outspoken about sanctions and other ways that the Russian government and Russian companies have been in oil trading and so forth has been targeted by the U.S. and its allies. So He's taken a whole different line, which is very classic Zimbabwe in the way that they've pursued this, in a way that they still are able to keep the attention of the biggest powers there. Of course, one of the things everybody's paying attention to are what's in the ground in Zimbabwe, not just what's coming up out of the real estate deals, right?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the richest part of the mineral belts. I mean, Zim, and Congo are copper, platinum, gold, all the critical metals and whatnot. Now, you were talking about the China relationship, because Zimbabwe was out in the cold for so long. That's sort of an environment where the Chinese can really kind of take advantage of sort of the deficit of international investors, and they have done. And interestingly, the route I took is we took Emirates from Lusaka to Harare, and the flight goes onward to Dubai. That's kind of the easiest way to get there from Lusaka. And fully a third of the plane will be Chinese, and to the point where when you get off when you land at the airport and you go through immigration, the immigration officers speak basic Chinese. It's amazing because they've been part of the fabric of Zimbabwe for a long time, and they go for they're big investors in the mines, and they know how to play the game in terms of greasing where they have to make things work for them. But mining is it's an interesting business. It's extremely expensive. It's a hard place for Americans to go or Europeans to go because of the regulatory uncertainty and because they can't play by the same rules that the Chinese play. But at the same time, there are huge opportunities in fast-moving consumer goods, in agribusiness. Zimbabwe is just one of the most agriculturally blessed countries in Africa, but also new economy things like CBD. The government has started issuing CBD licenses, and we've seen some players in that space. IT and tech startups. There's what I found super interesting was that there are so many tech startups in Zimbabwe, Zambia for that matter as well. But for instance, when I was at the property conference, there was a group there called Injecta Analytics, and they did the most amazing kind of data mapping using satellite imagery to find sort of synergies for property developers. But where are the banks, where the high density nodes, and kind of mapping shopping corridors and things. And it's the kind of big data that allows developers and investors and banks and whatnot to kind of figure out demographics and where to build, or where to have a supermarket, that kind of stuff. And I also noticed, interestingly, that there are the Africans, let's face it, have big families, and a lot of these families, a lot of them, the doctors, the lawyers, they'll go to, I met a family of 7, that were all in their 30s and early 40s, and 2 were in South Africa, and 3 were in the United States. 1 was in Canada, and 1 was in the UK, and the last one was like, well, I'm gonna make my money here, and he was doing just fine. And there is now a kind of sense that people are from the diaspora from the mature economies are kind of reinvesting back. And here's a very interesting data point that somebody brought up to me. And Africans are notoriously patient, right? They have a much longer view of time, and they think generationally a lot of times, which is a wonderful quality about them. But a young gentleman, a businessman, was saying, the current president is 81 years old, and all his compatriots who were sort of the revolutionaries. And the revolutionaries, you have to understand, had a very, they had a very elite status in, in the country and in government and in terms of like the opportunities, much like in South Africa, where sometimes it wasn't even deserved. It had gone on too long. It was too dirty, but it's just the way it is. And he said, thing is, that whole generation is dying out, and you give it another 5 or 7 years and these guys are going to be gone. And now you've got this whole new generation of people who kind of grew up under independence and bursting at the seams to get out and didn't have access to all the, sort of the sinecures and the goodies that were being handed out because they were part of the revolutionary, part of the independence war. And he said to me, and that's when you're going to see a big change here, because the value system is quite different, and the reference points are different, and there's a very international kind of point of view. And the young groups, they don't really care about Russians and Chinese. They care about Bugattis and cars, and trips to Cancun. Exactly. So I thought,
and they don't have any historical memory of any of that, of the revolutionary fervor, and that's what their parents or grandparents were caught up in. But they're in the internet world. They're in a different place.
So true, man.
Should I just mention, because we're talking about, one of the things we're going to talk about in this Rush for Africa podcast as we go forward is this a rush or is this a retreat? And are there some things to be aware of that would maybe give you pause if you were looking at Zimbabwe? Just to highlight one of the big things that has happened is that the big sanctions program, as I mentioned, it's lasted 2 decades, was ended by President Joe Biden in March. But then he quickly imposed a more targeted group of sanctions on the president, Mnangagwa, the first lady, a few other officials, and on some business associates or alleged business associates, including a guy who runs something called Secunda Holdings, which the U.S. says accuses of facilitating state corruption. And the specific things the U.S. is targeting, these new sanctions, is what it says is the gold and diamond smuggling that is dominated by, they say, the president of Zimbabwe and his circle, which they call a, quote, criminal network of government officials and business people associated with the ZANU-PF ruling party. The overall U.S. concerns are around democratic backsliding and the government corruption, as well as the lashing out at the opposition and anyone really kind of challenges the regime. There have been a large number of people who have been arrested in the past 3 months or so, even right before Mnangagwa assumed the presidency of the South African Development Community, the regional economic grouping, which got a lot of backlash from international human rights observers. There was also deep concern about how legitimate was the election in which he was reelected last year, because again, there was suppression of the opposition and the suppression of international election observation, particularly right before the votes were cast. So those are big concerns on the U.S. List. And if you are concerned about accountability and about inclusive governance, you have to look at these factors and decide, is this where you want to be doing business? But you also need to be very aware of not doing business with any entity that's accused of in these new U.S. sanctions, because this could mean you might get caught up in that net. Those sanctions are targeting banks, other financial institutions, as well as anybody who's kind of trying to create a trade with or create kind of a corporate relationship with those. So if you want to know more about that, go to the U.S. Treasury Department website, particularly the Office of Foreign Assets Control, and you can get at all the details on those sanctions. Now, one last thing, CJ, guess who tweeted in favor of the lifting of the sanctions right after, in favor of and praising Joe Biden right after he announced this decision back in March that they were getting rid of this 2-decade-old, very broad program that had a lot more people on the list. It was the neighbor, HH, President Hakainde Hichilema of Zambia, who said it was evidence that Biden is listening to his African partners. So I assume that from that, reading between the lines, that HH was in the background lobbying for those big, broader sanctions to be dropped, and probably because that benefits business with Zambia, which borders Zimbabwe. So that's your update on sanctions, on the basically the U.S. position. Just be cautious.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so, if we're talking about risk mitigation, I'll speak to it from the investor's point of view. I mean, the one really interesting thing about Zimbabwe at the moment is it's pretty much a cash economy. Even people who are buying homes or making large purchases for cars or things like that, they're paying in cash. So there's a lot of money floating around. There's also, I think, some opening in government, the realization that they have to draw FDI. They know that it's a hard sell to a lot of the sort of the international agencies and countries and whatnot. But there is a sort of a cadre of international investors who will kind of look at the risk reward and decide that they want an early mover advantage in the country. And the right now it's not a very crowded field, and it is the right time to get sort of plan a route there if you've kind of taken the medium view, which is kind of what we've done. Now, part of what is interesting for us about Zim in particular is because we're established in Zambia. We like the adjacent countries like Tanzania and Kenya and Botswana in the south, and so it just becomes part of the buffet of opportunities, because these are Zim and Zam are both land linked countries. There's a lot of natural trade between Zambia and Zim and also the adjacent countries. Zambia is one of the fastest growing countries in Africa. Lusaka is one of the top 10 fastest growing cities in the world. And Zim is like the smaller twin sister, and so a lot of the demographics that are very similar. So it's definitely a growth market. And I think despite the huge parity between the haves and the have-nots, there seems to be a gradual sort of incremental escalation in the middle class and spending power. So like whether you're dealing directly with the Zimbabwean customer, population, property, fast-moving consumer goods or financial services, or if you're building a sort of part of a international network where you're involved in hard and soft commodities, fuel, any of the stuff that falls into the wheelhouse of international trade, then I see a lot of opportunity there. And frankly, a big part of it is just how beautiful the country is and how agreeable the people are. That's a big appeal.
That's always a really important indication. And let me ask you this. Here's a little pop quiz, since we're talking about trade. What's the largest destination for exports from Zimbabwe? Clue, it's not China and it's not South Africa, which also borders Zimbabwe.
You got me. I don't know.
You had a little clue was you were talking about the Emirates flights that come in straight into Harare. The largest destination is the UAE, United Arab Emirates, which includes, of course, Dubai as well as Abu Dhabi as one of the Emirates. But and I guess that's because of the gold and diamonds and all the stuff, because that's probably goes into their markets there for sale. I don't know. I haven't looked deeply at the numbers, but that surprised me because we got so much talk about China. You don't think about UAE.
It's funny because we've if you're in this part of the world, you can't not but see gold flying around, and people trying to do deals and whatnot, and the occasional sort of controversy of some minister was found with so many kilograms of gold at the airport or whatever. But interestingly, in Dubai, one of the reasons Dubai is kind of a favorite place is because they actually, Emirates has like gold storage in their commercial flights. They've got a gold safe in their commercial
Is that
flights.
right?
Yeah, and you can carry, I think, up to 10 or 30 kilograms in a suitcase with your belongings on the flight. And
Is that next
when you
to the
get
whiskey cabinet? Where can I find that?
I think it's next to the Havana cigars, probably. And when you get to Dubai, there is a sort of a like a they have some kind of security and gold sort of border customs thing. It's sort of like the diamond thing in New York City, where the plane, the inspector is right there. They take it into storage, and so there's so much gold that goes between Zambia, Congo, Zimbabwe, straight to Dubai, that they've just built the infrastructure right as soon as you get off the airplane. So no doubt.
And Zimbabwe's new currency is the Zimbabwe gold, but it's not called that. What's it called, CJ?
It's called the Zig, and interestingly, just as
Well, the zigzag.
Yeah, no, the zig is zagging right now. Zagging and sagging, I think. See, what's so interesting, as you would expect, every country wants control of their currency, because then they can move the levers of the economy, and Zim is no exception. The problem for them, though, is so this new currency apparently is backed by gold reserves, as well as like $500 million in U.S. Forex that happens to be in the country. Sort of like the gold standard. It now includes U.S. dollars, which are not on the gold standard. But they've been basically universally did by the Zimbabweans themselves. Like, nobody trusts the banks, and so what you see happening, because they know that the government is completely capable of coming in and confiscating foreign forex that happens to be sitting in the banks. So nobody puts their money in the banks, and nobody wants to deal with the zigs or the zags, and I think the government's having a hard time making it become a thing, because they just don't have the confidence of the general public. So basically, everybody's trading in dollars. And my footnote to that is that the dollars they give you are so overtraded, so old, so dirty. If you could imagine, like a 60-year-old $5 note in circulation.
They taped together?
Yeah, it would only be in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, it's remarkable the economy functions at all, but somehow it does move forward. And the Zimbabwe story, like you're describing, the potential recharging of the economy. Like I said, the IMF agrees with you, saying they're forecasting 6% economic growth next year, which is pretty strong across Africa, and saying that's going to be powered by the rebound of agriculture as we get out of the drought conditions, hopefully have good rains this season, as well as manufacturing, which I don't know a whole lot about what they're referring to exactly, but that sounds positive, because a lot of African countries are trying to increase manufacturing to create jobs and to basically get into get out of the strict resource commodities sort of loop they've been in for forever, it seems like. Certainly Zambia is trying to get into that game as well. That would tend to support, like, not just housing like you're talking about, but is there commercial, industrial, warehousing, are those kind of the real estate opportunities as well?
Yeah, those are big opportunities, and that's kind of an Africa play. Whether it's industrial warehousing or data centers or retail centers, student housing is a huge thing. There's just a huge deficit of affordable housing for students. We were looking at projects, and I was hearing stories of people who would walk 15 kilometers to get to school because there was just no housing near and available to that. And yet they were paying $250 a month per bed. I mean, it's really remarkable.
Yeah.
So it's there's also, in a lot of these African countries, there's always kind of a group that does a lot of the FMCG, the fast moving consumer goods, like the biscuits and the soaps and the detergents and that's a scale business, sort of a bottom of the pyramid business. They tend to make these things in very small packets because people don't buy it for the month. They buy it for the next few days or for the week or whatnot.
Yeah.
But it's a scale business, low margin, high quantity. And manufacturing, as you point out, and production, there's a lot of talk about battery production. I mean, I think Zim has one of the largest lithium deposits in the world. I've noticed in a lot of these countries, platinum, and a lot of the other green metals as well. And because these are new economy businesses, batteries and solar panels and all that stuff, governments tend to kind of always be a little behind the curve in terms of where the regulatory environment is and how they issue licenses. Perfect example of that is when fintech and mobile money, started to really explode in Africa, almost faster than any other part of the world. They were regulated as mobile phone companies. They weren't regulated as banks or financial services companies, even though everybody was transacting using their phones and stuff. And I think a lot of that is happening also in these other industries. So it's, the regulatory wheels always go slow and things go way faster than they do. But that's, I think for guys like us, that's where the arbitrage is. It's in these inefficient markets is where you find great opportunities, and they may not be long plays, but they're great opportunities. And the other thing I think is worth mentioning is that more and more, speaking of private equity, there are investment opportunities in companies, IT companies, fintech companies that have large books because they may have 100, 200, 300,000 people that they're providing sort of payday loans or factoring for, whatever. It's kind of pick your own adventure. Here are the metrics. Got a big population. It's growing really fast. It's really young. They want to be entertained. They're getting wealthier. They're becoming more mature in their consumer lives. They need places to live. They need places to go to school. They need healthcare infrastructure. Blend that with technology and the new economy and all the sort of everything about the information age that reduces the need for infrastructure but increases the distribution. And it's just really the Wild West. It's an amazing place to be at the moment. Lots of opportunities for sure.
So in those disrupted circumstances, there's often lots of opportunities that to grab if you know how to go about doing it. I'll mention one thing, and then I'm going to ask for your practical takes as we wrap this up on how to go about concretely pursuing some of those opportunities. You mentioned that the president is 81 years old. He's announced in China, I think yesterday, that he does not plan to seek a third term, which I think would require a constitutional change. I'm not entirely certain about that, but he would be 85 years old if he were trying to contest for another election. And that shows, as you were saying, the sort of the aging of the revolutionary generation in Zimbabwe. It also shows, though, that those guys are going to be in control for most of the 2020s. So you're going to have to be dealing with that regime. And perhaps it will become a bit more open in terms of its relations with the opposition and open as a society generally. So, but let's turn back toward your trip. You just wound up. CJ, okay, I want to get in on all this excitement. What do I do? What concretely do I do to approach this?
So, great question. Basically, what's the entry point? So you have to figure out where you want to play, and maybe you're just an opportunistic investor looking for yield or growth. My assessment is that because it's a cash economy, if you're in property or other things, these communities or markets where you can still sell off plan, you can generate a lot of traction just by building some basic infrastructure if you're in property, or if you're in education, for instance, and you are already an operator or a healthcare operator who has an oncology center, or if you are already kind of operating in some other country and you think you want to come into this market because of the growth potential, there's lots of opportunities to do that. And because you're already an operator, your risk is somewhat mitigated already because you own all the intellectual property, and now it's just about servicing this young customer base. We like to work with institutional players like pension funds and asset managers. We find them surprisingly to have great governance and a real good understanding of fiduciary responsibilities and stuff. And so if you stick with the pension funds and the institutional guys, you are in high demand sectors, whether it's healthcare or education or property or trading, things like that, then I think you can really do well and establish yourself fairly quickly. The key is you need a strong partner. It's always scary for offshore investors to kind of go into a new country and kind of hook up with the brother-in-law of the vice president or something. That doesn't sound like a good plan. But what you will find is when you go into these countries, Zim in particular, is you'll find established companies that you can partner with who have been around for a long time. You kick the tires, they've got audited financials. And so if you bring value and you need somebody who can add value in a local context, you can find those players. A lot of them you can find through like the American Chamber of Commerce or the British Chamber of Commerce. There's always a Chinese Chamber of Commerce if that's your flavor. And basically any of the business chambers will be able to plug you in. And keep in mind too that, as you pointed out earlier, whether all the big brands are already here. They're in Africa, even in places like Zim, where for many companies it was a no-go. But think about like InBev and Coke and KPMG and PwC and all the big banks. Even Citibank is in Zambia. I don't know if they're in Zim, but you will find a lot of familiar faces, a lot of familiar brands, and with that, a lot of reputation surety, because you know what they stand for and how accountable they are. So if I can be of further help, you can definitely drop me an email and I'll spin you in the right direction. I know my partner Edward in Africa, Ed DeMarco, he deals a lot with the agency side and the embassy side, the international community, and so between us, we know a lot of people, and I think that's a good starting point as well.
That's good stuff. Do you think we call this a rush or a retreat as our rush for Africa kind of continue? It sounds to me like we're not on the pariah side anymore. We're maybe shifting a lot toward the next big thing.
I'm kind of into the big thing camp. I think Zim has got a bright future, and I think it's going to require bobbing and weaving a little bit over the next few years. But as I said in the description, fortunes are being made right now. And I'll end it by saying, I had a sit down with a good friend of mine who owns a REIT, a real estate investment trust. in Zimbabwe, and we were having a little catch up. As I said goodbye, he said, CJ, you need to come spend time here. You need to put a foot down here because things are happening and you should be here. So I'm like, thank you for that.
There you go.
I'm coming.
Sounds like he'll be back, maybe even ordering a few drinks at the Pariah bar just for old time's sake.
I'll keep a stool warm for you. Hopefully we'll see you there too.
Just a reminder to everyone listening, we are on a journey here toward developing Rush for Africa into a full-fledged podcast that you'll be able to see across platforms. Stay tuned for that. We're still in development on that. But meantime, that's why one of the reasons why we're doing these live chats, to try to capture the insights that we're gathering along the way. And you'll hear from me as well as when I get back to Africa. But for today, that's our wrap on Zimbabwe. It's great to see you, CJ.
Great to see you, Edward. Enjoy the States. I look forward to seeing you on this side soon. All right.
Great. Take care.
All right. Signing off.